Tutorial 4, Configuring ARSCADA Components onto Virtual Tours. In this tutorial we shall see how to configure the ARSCADA component in the virtual tour. So the documentation for each component is given in this HTML page as we have seen. So we will try to see the actual configuration that we have used for the projects. For that, let's open the project and open a virtual tour. Now it contains tour.html and tour.xml files. So XML file contains all the plugins that have to be configured. So let's open the xml.tour file. So it contains all the virtual configuration of all virtual tours as copied from the examples folder of KRPano. Configuration of our components starts from this point. From here, the first component added is cursor position. Which is this component. So it is added as a plugin. You can add a component as a plugin or as a hotspot. The difference is plugin will remain stationary on the screen at the defined XY coordinates on the screen, whereas the hotspot moves as you rotate the screen. We'll see the difference later. So the components configured for this plugin are: give a name to this instance of the plugin and give the URL of the plugin, Flash version of the plugin as well as the JavaScript version, JavaScript HTML5 version. So URL and alternate URL is for the Flash version and the HTML5 version. So depending on which browser it is, it will pick up the right plugin version, default being the Flash version. Then this component align basically tells that you always keep the component on the top left corner, which is here. So if you rotate the screen, this component, plugin component, doesn't move, whereas all the others component have been added as hotspots. So the next parameter is version. If you type 1 here, it will display the version number in the debug window. It will display all the components loaded and what's the version number. Cursor position is this, version number is 1. So this is applicable if you click on this, it displays the XY coordinates of the cursor where I am moving. If I click, it will remember the last position. Last cursor position will be shown here. X is this, Y is this, and this is the angular coordinates of this point. So when you want to place a plugin or a hotspot, we have to find out its location by clicking the cursor wherever we want the component to appear and make a note of this XY coordinates of this point as well as the horizontal and vertical angles of this point. So this has to be used in the information, can be noted down and used in the configuration file. So the font color and font size is basically for the parameters, fonts of size of the parameters which are displayed for the cursor position. Bold, italic and justification of the text. So next parameter is a button, which is basically, let me switch off this. Button is this component that we have configured here. So you can see it is added as a hotspot, and a name is given to that button 1, to that instance of that component. Each instance has to have a unique name. We have got only one instance of each component. And again, URL, alternate URL, which is Flash and JavaScript HTML5 version. This is the angle I was talking about, horizontal and vertical angle of this point. If you click here, the component will not receive the event. So you can see this is the horizontal and vertical angle approximate, and we have entered the approximate values here. Again, version is it will display in the debug window the version number of the component. And button variable, this is the tag as configured in the ignition server. We don't have the full tag path, only the after the slash. And add sign is required, is optional. So tag 100 value, whatever is there on the ignition server, will be displayed in the button here. Border color, border thickness in pixel, cell background color, and font color to be displayed for the button, font type, font size. These are all the parameters explained in the documentation page. And what should be the text displayed? If the state is 0, it will display the string off. If it is 1, it will display on. If it is 2, it will display trip. And down command and up command are the strings that will go to the ignition server. You have to give the fully qualified tag path and a pipe character and the value. So you have to give a proper value. So this command, when you click the button down, it will be sent to the ignition server and set this tag, fully qualified tag path you have to provide here, and its value to false. When you press the button up, it will set the value to true in the ignition server. In the standalone mode, it just locally it processes this command. Nothing goes to the ignition server. Next component is a zoom icon. Basically, it's just a PNG file at defined coordinates, and it has been given a scale factor of 0.25 to reduce the size. And there is a Z order parameter which is important for overlapping symbols. For example, the spot 1 is this image. If you click on the image, it displays the bar. So basically, on click will switch this hotspot, which is called level bar 1, which is defined later. It will make it visible and invisible. It will switch, toggle between the two states. And since the next hotspot is defined exactly at the same coordinates, these are overlapping. The Z order parameter defines which should overlap which. So for example, here we have defined a Z order for this higher than Z order for the the spot 1 icon. So this level bar component will appear on top of, it will hide the zoom icon. So next component defined is a level bar, and here also we have defined a toggle command for toggling. So it will disable, it will switch the visibility from true to false for the same component itself. Then you have URL and alternate URL and the coordinates and Z order and the fill color and empty color and the width of the border of the bar and what's the height. All these are configurable. So these are all in pixels. And what should be the font, what should be the variable or the tag from the ignition server it has to display. The @ sign is optional. What's the maximum value and minimum value, units, definition, all of this, the decimal points of display, and there is optionally a multiplication factor. You can give any factor. By default it is 1, but you can increase it by 10 times or 100 times by changing the multiplication factor here. So these are all explained in the documentation. So next component is again a zoom icon, which is for the meter. So basically for this meter, behind every component you have the zoom icon. If you click, it displays the component, and if you click on the component, it hides itself. So that is how we achieve the toggling effect. So again the coordinates and the Z order for this is defined because these two are exactly at the same XY coordinates or the vertical horizontal angles overlapping. So parameters for this meter are radius and the meter variable and the description, etc. So you can define the font size and font color and dial color, everything for the dial as well as for the value text. Both are separately configurable. So you can play with it and experiment with it and read the documentation. Next component is the scale, which has a similar structure. That is this component. It hides, and by clicking the zoom icon it comes back. That's true with every component. So this is similar. Then there is a multi-state indicator component, which is again displays the state, which is basically this component. So depending on the status of the tag that you define, it will change the display parameter to on off trip. If the state of this, it will not read the value, it will read the state. State is 0, it will display off. If it is 1, it will display on. If it is 2, it will display trip. Then you have static text, which is basically whatever cell, whatever text you display here, right here, it will appear over there. Then you can change the color of this text, the border, you can hide the border, it can be without the box, and all that is configurable. Then cell component. Cell component is basically, it has the dynamic tag and its units and its description. They are displayed in a single cell. You can define the border, the color of the text, everything, configure it in the XML, which is shown here. Tank pressure is the description, bars is the units, and the tag value is fetched from the ignition server equal to tag for tag number 2, and this dynamic value changes in the cell. Then there is this acknowledge component. So it has to be just aligned to right bottom, and nothing else has to be done. Just include it, the URL, and it will work. Then you have a row of text. So you can define as many columns as you wish, but in a single row of text. So this is configured parameters, and you have to define number of columns, and in the column variables you have to define, separated by a semicolon, the 4 parameters which define the columns. So any string, if it is not preceded with the @ sign, will be printed as it is in that column. If something is preceded with the @ sign, it's a tag, it's a dynamic tag which will be fetched from the server. Rest everything will be printed as it is, and the cell width and height will be calculated based on the length of the string and the font properties that you define. One more thing with the dynamic tag is that you can specify the decimal points here. By default decimal point is 0, so you can make it decimal point 2 or 1 or 4, whatever, followed by that a pipe character and a multiplication factor. So the tag value, whatever it fetches from the ignition server, it will multiply that value only for the purpose of display. Nothing changes in the ignition server. So you can see that these are 2 dynamic values used here. Rest is all static text. So as you can see here, these values are dynamically changing. Its value and its state is coming from the server. Actually this is a demo mode, so it's locally being simulated, and depending on the value, the state, the blinking pattern changes, whereas these 2 remain static. Then you can define the properties of the font. It should be, whether it should be left justified, right justified, bold, underline, and the color can be defined in a separate word, and it will be separated by 4 values separated by colon, which define for each the properties of the text for each column. Since there are 4 columns, there will be 4 semicolons. So by default, if you give 0, it will take default values, and cell background color and font size, everything you can specify. Then you have a text table, which is for larger parameters. So its structure is similar to cell, only difference is that you have columns as well as rows defined for it, and you can give the column values separated in new lines, because new lines are ignored in the XML. So this table, we have defined 4 columns and 6 rows. So there will be per row, there will be 4 values, as 4 columns are there. They are all separated by semicolon. So the first being the header title, serial number, description, tag name, value. The second row onwards, you can define, the first row is reserved for the heading. Second row onwards, you can define mixture of static as well as dynamic text. So anything that is preceded with a @ sign will be a dynamic tag, which will be fetched from the server, and rest will be printed as it is. For dynamic tags, again here you have the option to specify the number of decimal points and the multiplication factor. So you can that applies to all the tags, and you can define any cell with a dynamic value or a static value. Then you have option to give a title, and what should be the, whether it should be bold or underline or left justification can be specified here. And one important thing about rows is that if you define more number of rows, then it will append the table with empty rows. And if you define actual data less number of rows than what it is defined here, then it will truncate, it will display only that many rows, rest of the data will be ignored. And you have the column properties defined here. Again, about the properties of the text, its font and its color and its justification, etc. So these are all explained in the documentation. There is a plugin Watercolor, plugin Fill Color. So basically, you can have something surrounding a table box surrounding the table. It defines the color of that, and by default it will give a transparency of 25% for it, for the bigger box. Then you have a multi-page table, which is similar to the single page table. Only thing is you can have number of you can have, for example, in this case you have 6 rows and you define only 4, so it will print only 4 values, and for the next remaining values you have to go next page. So you can define larger tables using this component. Spinner is again explained that you have to give basically the variable for the button and display the value which will be displayed in the spinner here. For this, what's the value, and there will be 2 variables, the button up and button down variables, which is defined here. Increment up and decrement up. Basically, the button up event is captured, and when the button is increment button up is pressed, so this string, this tag path will be incremented by this delta value, and when the decrement up button is pressed, the same tag will be decremented by this value. So that is how we configure all the components, and we have basically copied this entire components into all the scenarios has the same set of components. This is only for your understanding, and you can experiment with it, and you can modify it the way you want to configure your parameters. So that's all about configuring the components in ARSCADA.